Okay, we'll call to order the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals, a special meeting for July 6, 2012. Have a couple items of old business. The first one is a variance request, application Z12034 by Mr. Monty Turner, requesting the following variances for property located in a commercial highway zone at 115 Lasseter. This application has three components. The first is pertaining to a proposed building, a 15-foot variance from the minimum required 42-foot front setback along Lasseter Drive for principal structures as stated in Chart 2 of the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance. The second is pertaining to proposed heating and air equipment and enclosure, a variance from Section 25E5 of the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance, which states that in all commercial and industrial districts, accessory structures and uses shall comply with the same front setback as is required for the principal structure. And the third component is pertaining to proposed heating and air equipment and enclosure, a 24-foot variance from the minimum required 42-foot front building setback along Lasseter Drive for accessory structures as stated in Chart 2 of the City of Murfreesboro zoning ordinance. Matthew.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Young. I'll just give you a brief overview. I know at our meeting on the 27th, I gave you a more detailed overview, so I'll give you the brief version. And this item we did conduct a public hearing on June 27th for these three variance requests, and we deferred due to lack of quorum for this one item. But there was no one to speak at the public hearing, and it was basically just deferred due to lack of quorum for this particular item. The subject property is currently located at 115 Lasseter Drive, which is on Lasseter Drive is a small connector street in between Mercury Boulevard and East Main Street. It's kind of a leftover portion of the old Mercury Boulevard before the TDOT construction project of the Mercury Boulevard extension. If we can go to the aerial photo. Currently, there's a car wash on the subject property. The applicant proposes to demolish the car wash and construct a new Dollar General store on the subject property. It is a double frontage lot, which means that it does have setbacks, front setback requirements on both the Mercury Boulevard side and the Lasseter Drive side. The applicants are proposing to have access both via Mercury Boulevard and Lasseter Drive, but the primary access would be via Mercury Boulevard, and the front of this proposed store would front on Mercury Boulevard. The rear of the proposed store would front on Lasseter Drive. As you can see on the proposed site plan that you have in front of you, the applicant is requesting three variances, and those are denoted on the site plan. First of all, the proposed building is the proposed Dollar General building. The principal structure on the property is proposed to be 27 feet at the very northwest corner of the building to the Lasseter Drive property line. You can see how the Lasseter Drive right-of-way kind of curves, and the lot is actually deeper on its east side than it is on its west side. The applicant is also requesting variances for the proposed heating and air equipment, which are considered accessory structures, and the associated enclosure. Accessory structures in commercial zoning districts, and this property is zoned commercial highway, are required to meet the same setbacks for the principal structure. The applicant is requesting a 24-foot variance from the required 42-foot front setback for accessory structures in the commercial highway zone, and a variance from the requirement that accessory structures in commercial and industrial zoning districts must meet the same setbacks as for the principal structure. As I mentioned at the last meeting, the applicant has committed to building a wood and brick enclosure around the heating and air equipment to soften the view of the heating and air equipment on Lasseter Drive along that property line. This is an example of what he would do. He has not come up with the final design for this as of yet. The building will be all masonry. Here are the submitted elevations for the building. And in the staff comments and in the write-up provided by the applicant's design engineer, Mr. Steve Steele. He has gone over the reasons for the variance request. Some of those are with regards to the fact that there needs to be significant facilities on site for drainage, and he states that the design challenges from a stormwater management standpoint require on-site detention, and the applicant states that shifting the building to the north, as proposed, will facilitate a more efficient handling of stormwater in that area. In addition, he points to the properties on both sides of the subject property along Lasseter Drive. The Camino Real is also encroaching into the 42-foot front setback. I believe that portion of the building that is encroaching was built prior to the current zoning ordinance. I believe it was built sometime in the mid-'70s. But the building to the west actually received a 17-foot front setback variance back in 1995 from the Board of Zoning Appeals. With that being stated, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Turner emailed me earlier this week and stated that he could not be in attendance at this meeting. However, Mr. Steve Steele is available, his design engineer, if you have any questions for him. As I mentioned, we held our public hearing last Wednesday on the 27th during our regular meeting, so no public hearing is scheduled for today. We're considering this item under old business.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions for Matthew at this point? If not, anything the applicant, Mr. Steele, anything you'd like to add to this one?
I'm here to answer any questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further questions? As before, I will call the vote, but I will not vote based on Dollar General being a large customer of mine. And again, this application has three components, so we'll start with the first one. 15-foot variance from the minimum required 42-foot front building setback along Lasseter Drive.
Mr. Chairman, if there's no further discussion, I'll move for approval of the 15-foot variance.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There are none. That part has passed. We'll move to the second piece, proposed heating and air equipment enclosure, which states that in all commercial and industrial districts, accessory structures and uses shall comply with the same front setback.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve the heating and air equipment variance from Section 25E5.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There are none. That piece is passed. Next is the 24-foot variance for the heating and air equipment.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we approve the 24-foot variance.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There are none. That application has been approved. Thank you.
And Vice Chairman Young, I just wanted to make sure that the record reflected that you abstained from all three votes.
The next item on our agenda is a special use permit under old business. It's application Z12036 by Mr. Gary Anderson from Murfreesboro City Schools, requesting a special use permit in order to expand an existing institutional group assembly use, a public school, in a residential single-family RS-12 zone for property located at 2340 St. Andrews Drive. The applicant is seeking approval for the placement of 3 portable classroom buildings. Matthew.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Young. The second item that we have today under old business, we also conducted a public hearing on June 27th. It is for the expansion of an existing institutional group assembly use, which is Scales Elementary School, and is located at 2340 St. Andrews Drive in the RS-12 zoning district. The applicant is seeking approval for the placement of 3 portable classroom buildings on the subject property. And as I mentioned, this item was deferred at our last meeting, last Wednesday. We had several neighboring property owners speak. specifically with regards to the interface between the portable classroom buildings and the surrounding neighborhood, specifically the homes to the north along Deerview Drive and the view shed from the front along St. Andrews Drive. The Board of Zoning Appeals deferred the item until such time as a more specific landscape and screening plan could be submitted to address some of those concerns. After the meeting, staff met with both the applicant and his design engineer to discuss screening options, and after that meeting, the applicant generated two alternative landscape plan, or a preferred landscape plan, Plan A, and an alternative plan, Plan B, for the board's consideration. First, before we go into those, let's look at the site itself. And it would help if I turned it around correctly. That's always a help. Subject property, as I mentioned, along the west side of St. Andrews Drive. The portables are proposed to be located right in the L of the front and north wings of the existing elementary school. There would be 3 portables, as I mentioned. Here's more of a close-up of that area. Portables would be located in this area. These are the homes along Deerview Drive. And here is the front of the property, and this is kind of the edge of the tree line that is adjacent to St. Andrews Drive. As I mentioned, the applicant and his engineer have generated 2 landscape plans, both of which you have in your application materials. Plan A, which is their preferred plan, shows a row of evergreen trees directly adjacent to the portable buildings. And they're proposing Leland cypress, 6 feet in height, 10 feet off center, and there would be a total of 23. And those would wrap around the front of the building and then along the north side of the building as well. And as you can see, the exact measurements, I had given you approximate measurements at last Wednesday's Board of Zoning Appeals meeting, but the design engineer has given us exact measurements from the portables to the front and side property line. To that north side property line, it would be 172 feet from the portable, and to the front property line, 359 feet. In Plan B, the applicant is showing that same screen, the Leland cypress trees, along lots 33, 34, and 35 of the Salem Cove subdivision, as well as a row of evergreen trees in front of the portables. And that would be a total of 40 Leland cypress trees, 6 feet in height and 10 feet off center. According to the Urban Environmental Department, in either case, having 6-foot evergreen trees 10 feet off center would be the equivalent of a Type A buffer. In the agenda materials, I've included an email from Dr. Gilbert, the director of Murfreesboro City Schools. Dr. Gilbert outlines the reasons why she prefers, or why the school system prefers, Landscape Plan A. And she is also here if you would like her to address that as well. If the board approves this request, staff recommends the following conditions. And when I reference the approved landscape plan in these conditions, it's whichever landscape plan the Board of Zoning Appeals chooses, if they so choose to approve the application and require one of these landscape plans. Number one, a Type A buffer, as shown on the approved landscape plan, is required and must be planted no later than November 30th, 2012. And having it planted this fall will be a better way to ensure its survival for the duration of the time that the portables are there. And one thing that I do want to mention is that Mr. Anderson, in his write-up to the board, as well as in Dr. Gilbert's email to the board, have emphasized that it is their plan to have these portables removed at the end of not this school year, but the next school year. Number two, the Type A buffer must remain in place as shown on the approved landscape plan until such time as the portable classroom buildings are removed from the property. The Type A buffer will not be required to remain in place after the portable classroom buildings are removed from the property. Number three, during the time period where the Type A buffer is required, all trees in the buffer must be maintained in good condition as determined by the city horticulturist. In addition, any trees that die in the required buffer must be replaced during the following planting season. Mr. Anderson is out of town and was unable to attend the meeting, but in his stead from Murfreesboro City Schools are Dr. Linda Gilbert, Mr. Larry Williford, and Mr. Christopher Young. In addition, Mr. Bill Huddleston of Huddleston Steel Engineering is here, who will be present to answer any questions with regards to the design of the plans, the landscape plans as well. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. We did conduct a public hearing last Wednesday, so no public hearing has been advertised for this meeting. I do have the photographs that I showed you last Wednesday if you'd like to see those, or we could just go ahead and discuss the item.
You don't feel like they need to see the pictures from?
I'll just put on the record, Matthew, I wasn't here last Wednesday, but I have taken advantage of the city's website, and I did watch the public hearing and your presentation, so just for the applicants, anybody's here, I have reviewed what took place, even though I wasn't here to involve myself in the discussions at that time. I am aware of the public hearing, what was said, and what the concerns of the homeowners there close to the school have been, so I just want everybody to know that I have looked at all that. I've got a couple of questions for you, too. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in. The 2 years, I guess they've made that part of their application, but I notice we don't put any sort of, staff's not recommending condition. Is it staff's position that the 2 years, since they made it part of their application, is a time restriction on city schools to have those removed within that period, or are you leaving that to the board to decide that? Does that make?
Typically, when someone has made a part of their request, has formalized it in the application, it is a part of their request. Now, certainly, the board has it at their option to put an actual condition on the approval that the portables must be removed within a certain time frame. That would be within the board's purview.
But if we didn't make that a condition, would it be staff's position that they would still be bound by that 2 years based on that being in their application, or?
That would be my interpretation. I might ask for Mr. Ives' guidance on this, whether an actual condition would be more appropriate, or whether them actually just committing to it in their application would be sufficient.
Including a specific condition might be stronger. I would expect, though, that in either event, whether it's stated as a condition or whether it's simply here as part of their application, none of us here and to some extent the city schools does not have total control of their funding and their planning. They've got plans, and those are subject to change, I think we all know. And there's certainly a possibility that they could come back and say, we need another year or two if there's been a change in the construction schedule. So I would expect that, we would expect them to come back if they needed more time, regardless of whether it just stays as part of their application or if we make it a formal condition.
Right, they would have to come back to, if we put the 2-year time limit on it, city schools would have to come back before us to extend that or ask for more time or whatever.
That's correct.
Matthew, I believe that they asked for 5 years, did they not? Was that not in the application that they were asking for 5 years? It would be moved within the 5 years?
No, that was actually for Providence Christian Academy, which was on the same agenda last week. They requested 5 years for the portable classrooms that they were putting on their property.
Okay.
And it might be helpful if you would kind of, the type A buffer is kind of thrown out there, and frankly, from time to time, I forget that whole scheme, but you might want to discuss where a type A falls as far as density with regard to the whole buffer scheme that the city has.
A type A buffer is it's our least dense buffer. It's not designed to be a complete visual screen. It's designed to provide some screening between land uses and to enhance the visual appeal between land uses. But it's not designed to be a very thick vegetative screen like we would see between an industrial use or a commercial use and a residential use.
Mr. Blumley, I've got, I think I voiced some reservations that I had at the public hearing last week. I've got several questions, so that I understand the reasoning for the placement of where the portables are going. I think it's mainly from an economic standpoint. I will voice my statement that I made last week that I dare say that if this was a private application and not a city school application, it wouldn't have ever come to this point through staff. I feel like that staff would have asked that any portables be at the rear of a building. However, I understand the process. So let me just, so I get all my questions and I have a better feeling about it. I'm with Mr. Dodd that we need to make it a condition that at 2 years these things are moved, and if the money's not appropriated for the new school, that these portables are moved to the rear or somewhere other than the front of the building. That would be my first comment. The other thing is that at a 6-foot height, I'm assuming, Mr. Huddleston, these trees will be planted at 6 feet, okay? My follow-up question was, my understanding in the last meeting was these would be placed, let's say, sometime before school, so August or before. But the plantings would not go up until November because of the fact that we don't want to plant something that's going to turn around and die. Is that a correct statement or an incorrect statement?
That's a correct statement.
Okay. So we'll go 3 months where there won't be any buffer whatsoever. Okay. Then the line of sight with respects to these homes at 6 feet, how tall will these portable, I'm sure they're on some sort of elevated level, but how tall will these portables be above the 6 feet trees?
I think I would have to defer to the applicants for that.
Good morning, Chairman Young and members of the BZA. I'm Bill Huddleston with Huddleston Steel Engineering. First of all, we're talking about planting them no later than November, so September, probably October. In reality, the trees would get planted. The portables themselves are approximately 11 feet in height.
So if a line of sight, and I think we talked about that they were some 172 feet from the nearest neighbor or close to it, is 6 feet tall enough to block the top of the building, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. You still might see the top of the building.
But it would be minimal. Would that be a fair statement?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Type A buffer, I think Mr. Dodd asked a very good question, that we are saying that this is a minimal buffer. If they're 10 feet center, how wide do these trees usually get? I mean, do you have any idea how wide the tree is?
They're going to grow together pretty
Eventually.
quickly, and actually it's more of a type B buffer, not a type A buffer.
Okay.
And it exceeds the planting required in a type B buffer.
Okay. All right.
These are closer together than normally would be required for a type B buffer.
Okay. Okay. That's all my questions.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any other questions for the applicant, or anything the applicant would like to add in addition to what's been presented?
Good morning. Thank you for considering this. I do want to reiterate our intention, to our full intention, of moving these as soon as we get a new school built, which needs to be relatively soon, or we're going to have issues, because we have children that really are coming out of the seams. And so I appreciate your concern that you've expressed this morning, both for the neighborhood and also for the children, because we are at a situation where we have no choice but to add portables. We are looking at already combining classrooms. We are looking at having 22 children to each classroom. I really don't want to go more than that, and we're going to be in excess of that this year. So it's unfortunate that we are to this point, because I certainly do not like portables, had no intention of putting in portables, but I feel like we don't have any choice. And so I appreciate your concern to make sure that whatever is decided here is best for both the community and for the children, and also for the budget. So thank you very much for being here today and for listening to us. Really appreciate it.
Just as a rebuttal or a comment, I'm not necessarily against the portables. I understand the reasoning behind it. My biggest drawback or concern is the placement.
Right.
And I understand that that's purely an economic decision. That's my hang-up.
I totally understand.
Honestly.
Mr. Anderson and I had several discussions about that, and several drives around the school to see if there was any other place that we possibly could have done it. There's an issue in the back of the drainage ditch, and I understand all that, but I am no more happy about where these are going to have to be located. I'm certainly not happy about the fact that we have to have them, and we looked at alternatives for several months before deciding that this really is the only way we had to go. If we knew that there would be no more growth there, we would be fine, but we're already seeing growth there, and we know that we have to do something. And unfortunately, this is the place where I'm told that they need to be. So I assure you, I understand that I feel exactly the way that the neighbors are feeling and that you are feeling about any hesitancy. And I think it's your job to make sure that this is the best way to do it, and it's my job too, and I appreciate that very much. So I'm not taking that in any way as you're being opposed to this. I totally concur with what you're saying.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gilbert. Matthew, we had the public hearing at the previous meeting. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. The public hearing has already been conducted for this item.
Okay. Is there any further discussion or questions, or?
I mean, I'll just give you my take on it. I mean, you need schools in residential areas. That's what you want. And then when you get to overcrowding, I mean, they have the portables. If you look at the alternate sites, there's going to be some visibility from somebody, no matter where you put them. I know in the Barfield area, although it's a county school, Barfield has portables, although it's not at what you would call the front of the school. It's clearly visible on two sides by residential areas. Nobody wants that, but they have to go somewhere, and it appears to me that if we put a time limitation on it and they're willing to come in and go to the expense of the screen, that at this point it seems to me they've done all they can do to mitigate whatever impact there's going to be on the visibility. I certainly understand the neighbors' concerns and not being happy about it, but I think I come back to, no matter where we put them, somebody's going to see them. I mean, there's no way to have them in a neighborhood without them having some kind of aesthetic impact on somebody, whether it's at the front or the back. I mean, all these other proposals still have a sight line to somebody's house on some side.
I think if we put a condition on it, I think we should at least give them 3 years instead of 2. Because some people do get 5. And I know it's in the front. And give them time to build a new school or add more space.
Well, the only thing I'd say about that, I mean, from my perspective, they've asked for 2. They can come back to us in 2 years, and I think that might give the neighbors the opportunity to get an update on what the status of this other school is. They would have a right to have another public hearing at that point, and then the schools could come and say, here's why we can't move them if they can't, and here's where we are, and here's what our time frame is at that point. I mean, I would be okay with 2, knowing that the neighbors would have an opportunity after 2 years to come in and hear the city tell us what the status of this school is and what the prospects of moving them and what the new time frame would be. I understand what you're saying, Ms. Mosby, but I think that gives, I mean, it doesn't mean the city can't come back and ask for more time, but then we would take it on its merits at that time based on what's happened during that period of time. It seems to me that gives both the neighbors and the schools an opportunity for us to review it again at that point.
And I believe that since they've really only asked for 2 years, I think that they would be bound by what they have in their application, to where if they did want to exceed that 2 years, since that's what they've asked for in their application, they would be required to come back, whether there's a condition of 2 years, 3 years. I still think they would be required to come back. Mr. Ives, would you agree with that?
I would agree.
But some type of condition, I think, would make it, getting a condition on the record is certainly not a bad idea.
It would take away any ambiguity as to what our intent was.
Yes, certainly would.
I feel like it's like we said, it's unfortunate they had to go the route of portables, but that we've made sure that we've addressed as best we can the issues that came up. So I'm kind of I'm comfortable with how they've laid it out. And so
Do we want to talk about A versus B at all? Do y'all have any thoughts on the
That would
proposed
be clarified for me.
A plan versus B plan?
I mean, at first glance, I would agree with their preference in A, because even if you plant the trees along 3 lots, there are other lots that will have a sight vision that the north side would not be buffered. So my preference would be their preference, which was A.
Yeah, I agree. When I first looked at it, I thought that I liked B more, but as you point out, it's really only along 3 of the lots, and of course, I think those are the neighbors that had expressed their concern because they're most directly affected by these, and it would probably more completely obscure the view of those 3 folks. But like you said, it opens up other lots and other areas for a view. Even coming down St. Andrews, you would have, traffic view, and there's probably some people across the street over here whose sight lines might have some impact, even though there is a sparse row of trees there. So when I first looked at it, like I said, I thought about B because the more immediacy would more fully block that sight line, but I think as I've looked at it, A seems to be the better option to me.
It also seemed more consistent with how you would landscape a building versus
Yeah,
trying to cover a few lots there.
Yep.
Go ahead. Yeah. If there's no further discussion, I'll make a motion that we approve with respects to the plan submittal A and a condition that that the city school board would have to come back before the BZA at the end of school year 2013-2014 if in fact they wanted to extend the time frame that the portables would be either placed in the same area that they are today or will be proposed or are proposed, or if they're wanting to move them in a different spot on that same area of at that school, I guess is the best way to say it, and then subject to any other staff comments that are made as part of the agenda.
May I ask a question of Dr. Gilbert? Dr. Gilbert, if these are removed after the 2-year period, at what date? I know it would have to be sometime after the 2013-2014 school year. Would June 30th of 2014 be enough time for those to be removed after the school year? Or?
We are hoping to have a new school ready to go at the beginning of that next school year. I think the only thing that I would say as far as the portables, yes. As far as if we were going to ship the trees any, I would want to make sure that we do that moving whenever they're viable. And so that would be my only request for that, is in thinking about the trees themselves.
Well, the way
I don't know if that gives you an answer, Matthew.
Well, the trees would be the requirement for the trees to remain would be in specifically correlated to the existence of those portables. My question was more towards if you do intend to remove them, it's probably best to just put a firm date in there.
Okay.
Obviously, if you needed to come back for additional time, you'd have to reapply to the Board of Zoning Appeals. My question would be, if you did not, what would be a reasonable date in that summer of 2014 for those? As far
as coming back to you, we would know by the end of that school year whether we would be ready for that new school, and I can't imagine that we wouldn't be ready for that new school. So as soon as that school year's over, we should be able to move the portables. The only question I would have is, I know that we're going to need to remove the trees in order to get the portables out, and my concern would be for the viability of trees. But as far as you were asking me when the portables could be moved, after that last day of school of that school year. I don't want the portables there any longer than they absolutely have to be there, believe me.
I think what he's, I mean, maybe, I don't know if it's up or not, but school will be over at the end of May. Would a month be enough time to have the school get in there and get that done, or would 2 months be more in order? I mean, do we need end of July of 2014,
Is
or
that a month? Okay.
a month would be?
So I'll amend my motion that will, they'll either be removed or be a reapplication by June 30th, 2014.
That works.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, we have a motion.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There are none. That application has been approved. Thank you for coming in. The next item on our agenda is staff reports and other business.
We have none today, other than for me to say thank you to all four of you for coming in early on a Friday morning to hear these two items. We appreciate y'all's hard work and commitment.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you. And thank you, folks, also.
All right.
Our last item is adjourned.